Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
Yeah, aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Friday, July 17th, 2015. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Today is multiple anniversaries in history. It is the anniversary of the accidental shoot-down of TWA Flight 800 off of Long Island, New York. It is the one-year anniversary of the possibly deliberate shoot-down, possibly accidental, of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 over Ukraine. And it is the anniversary of the assassination of Iraq weapons inspector Dr. David Kelly. And before we get into the current news, we're going to be taking a sort of a little look back here at what all of these various scandals happen to be. Now, the situation here is in March of 2003, the U.S. and its international gang members invaded Iraq for the second time, selling the war to the public with the claim Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons of mass destruction banned by the United Nations, therefore we have to go on in, get the nukes, and all will be well. They even came out and said that Saddam could, with only 45 minutes warning, attack Great Britain with weapons of mass destruction, and they had to move quickly to get all those weapons. Now, the real cause of the war was that a year before, in 2002, Iraq had secured permission from the United Nations to start selling Iraq's oil for the euro instead of the dollar. That was a threat to the petrodollar. It was a threat to U.S. domination of the global trade in natural resources. That was the real reason. Remember Dick Cheney's top-secret energy task force? When they finally started getting documents loose from it, it all turned out to be maps of Iraq's oil field. They weren't going to solve the energy crisis. They were just going to steal other people's energy. Now, today it is widely accepted that the claims of nuclear weapons were a complete lie used to justify what was this war to seize control of Iraq's oil. Okay, but in mid-2003, the growing suspicions of deception were still being denounced by the government and by the prostitutes and correspondents of the corporate media as conspiracy theories, and those who asked impolite questions were described as tinfoil hat-wearing kooks that no decent human being would ever want to be seen associating with. Now, attention quickly focused on a document produced by Tony Blair's office, since called the Dodgy Dossier, claiming that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, not only nuclear weapons, but biological weapons and chemical weapons. And the scandal started to explode when it came out this Dodgy Dossier was actually plagiarized from a hopelessly out-of-date student thesis. The student who had written it came forward and said, wait a minute, that's my thesis paper. It's 12 years old. And then there was the leaking of the Downing Street memo, which made it clear that the claims about weapons of mass destruction were propaganda being fixed around an already existing decision to launch a war of conquest into Iraq. Now, outcry by the public forced the British government to launch an investigation into what was going on. And the investigation, as every investigation has found, was that Saddam Hussein had complied with the United Nations resolution saying, get rid of your weapons of mass destruction. Iraq had never had nuclear weapons and had destroyed their stockpiles of chemical weapons, most of which they got from the United States to use against Iran. This made the U.S. and British invasion not only totally unjustified, it was illegal under international law as well. Unprovoked war is the ultimate war crime. Now, key to the British inquiry was one of the Iraq weapons inspectors, Dr. David Kelly, who resisted pressure to support the propaganda lie and provided clear documentation of the results of the inspections carried out by himself and his fellow teammates in trying to find these weapons that Bush and Blair kept insisting were over there. The British inquiry concluded that Bush and Blair had lied. Now, the inquiry's over, everything's calming down, and then on July 17, 2003, Dr. Kelly, relaxing after his harrowing ordeal before the panel, went for a walk and never returned home. His body was found the next day and immediately declared to be a suicide, a combination of an overdose of pills followed by the slashing of his wrists. But there were problems with that official story, starting with why Dr. Kelly would even consider suicide when the stresses of the inquiry were all over and behind him. Paramedics at the scene where the body was found insisted it had been moved after death, and they actually found EKG sensors still taped to his chest. Somebody was making sure that he was actually dead. Dr. Kelly's family insisted he was not suicidal. The package of pills found in Dr. Kelly's pocket didn't have his fingerprints on them. And one of the other UN weapons inspectors reported Dr. Kelly was on a hit list because of things he knew about this whole fraud about weapons of mass destruction that had not yet been made public. And a British agent admitted that he knew from internal sources in MI5 that Kelly had been exterminated to get rid of whatever it was he knew and to send a warning to other potential government officials who might want to actually dare tell the truth. Now, at that point, both Great Britain and the U.S. just pretended the issue was over and didn't matter anymore, and the corporate media continued on with, you are all tinfoil hat wearing kooks and nuts, and nobody should ever listen to you. You get used to that kind of abuse after a while. Let's grab a couple of quick phone calls here. Ed in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, the thing about the unborn babies, what they're doing with those parts is if you go to Pepsi website, you see that they're using unborn fetuses for flavoring in their soda. And that's a true story. You can Google it and see it for yourself.
All right, well, what has that got to do with TWA 800 or Dr. David Kelly or Flight 17? I mean, it just seems weird that you're calling in the middle of this discussion to try and take us off topic. I mean, you told our screener you wanted to talk about weapons of mass destruction.
No, I didn't. But anyway,
okay, well,
I had my radio.
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to DJ in Georgia. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Thanks for taking the call. Quick message to you is I saw the American Book of Secrets. It's on Netflix. The other day it was, and I just want to say kudos to you. He was looking sharp there. He had the haircut and everything going. So it was the first time I actually saw it. And they had some pretty good seasons in there. So I look forward to the entire thing.
Well, I noticed on History Channel it is rerunning again. The series does seem to have legs. Unfortunately, it's not been renewed for a new season. But I get emails all the time from friends and family saying, I saw you on the History Channel. I said, yes, you did. That's what I looked like way back in history.
Oh, man, yeah. Well, you did good work on there. And just wanted to bring up something. I was looking at some recent economic news that, the Saudis and actually the Arabs, they're holding a lot of, U.S. treasuries and dollar denominated, sovereign wealth funds and all this. And they were talking about diversifying out of the dollar. And I think Ashcroft, I think he's the Secretary of Defense, had to go down there to talk them out of it because at first everyone was worried that China, which is, setting up the BRICS as it already is, they're trying to, wind down the dollar. And then here goes the Arabs, which combined have probably 3 times more than China does when you add up all their sovereign wealth funds in dollars. They're trying to look to China to move some of those treasuries out. And with the news of all this quantitative easing, they're uneasy about the whole thing. So,
okay, well, DJ, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. I will respond to your comments after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And just real brief, responding to that last caller, the reason Saudi Arabia has invested so much of their oil money in American treasuries and American investments is that was part of the original petrodollar deal. When Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility, it was technically the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement. And the United States, in order to keep up foreign demand and use of U.S. dollars, off of which they were making this mafia-like piece of the action, they made a deal with the oil-producing nations of the Mideast, primarily Saudi Arabia, that the U.S. would constrain Israel from further attacks on their territory, and in exchange, these Arab oil nations would sell their oil only for the U.S. dollar, and then invest that money back in the United States of America. Back then, with a healthy U.S. economy, nobody had a problem with that. But today, the U.S. economy is in serious trouble. People are doubting that the dollar has any real worth anymore. And it is very obvious that the United States cannot restrain Israel's behavior. In fact, right now it's very obvious Israel's in control of the U.S. government. And so a lot of these oil nations that committed to the petrodollar deal are starting to say, well, obviously the deal is invalid. The U.S. cannot keep their half of the agreement. And they're starting to very quietly and slowly unload their U.S. investments. They don't want to do it all at once because then there'll be a panic and everybody gets hurt. But they are trying to unload their exposure to U.S. treasuries and U.S.-denominated assets. I don't know who's foolish enough to be buying them. It could very well be the Federal Reserve is just printing up more money out of thin air to buy back all of this stuff. But it's all just paper money. It's all made-up money. All right, getting on back to the anniversaries today. Back on this day in 1996, TWA Flight 800, a 747, took off from New York, was on its way to Paris, and exploded in midair. And witnesses on the ground, hundreds and hundreds of witnesses said they saw a missile fly up from this active military warning zone and hit the 747. Now, originally, the U.S. government said, oh, it was a terrorist shoot-down. And then it came out there was an ongoing U.S. Navy exercise in the area testing a system called Aegis CEC. And obviously the idea that terrorists could sail into the middle of a Navy exercise, flip off the kind of missile Aegis CEC is intended to design, and then skedaddle back out without being intercepted, nobody was going to believe that. And that's when the myth about the explosion in the center fuel tank was born. And the government's official explanation for all the eyewitness reports of a missile was they were all drunk. You know those people on Long Island, the evening, they're all drunk. Now, the official story is that the nose was blown off the 747 by the center tank explosion, and the noseless 747 then pitched up, zoom climbed 3,000 feet, trailing burning fuel, and that's what everybody thought was a rocket in flight. There are a couple of problems with that. First and foremost, with the nose section gone, the center of mass would move behind the center of lift, and the plane wouldn't be stable. It would flip over tail first, like trying to throw a dart backward. That's strike number one. But the main problem has to do with something I call the magic wing box. And this is obviously an homage to the magic bullet theory from the JFK assassination. And it has to do with the fact that at the very start of the debris trail, there were portions of major structural elements surrounding that center fuel tank that, in point of fact, hold the wings onto the airplane. And if you look at this story, it simply cannot work, because the official story is there was an explosion in the center wing tank sufficient to blow the front of the aircraft off, to destroy the span-wise beams holding the wings in place, but then the wings magically healed themselves so that the plane could then zoom 3,000 feet into the sky. Hence the name, the magic wing box. Now then, getting on to just a year ago and Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, and more information continues to surface. The official claim from the United States government is that Vladimir Putin shot down Flight 17 with this bear rifle or some such. The independent investigation going on will not confirm that. They're saying they can't confirm that Russia or the Russian independent republics in eastern Ukraine had anything to do with it. Now, there's an article that's come out in Russia today saying that new video footage has surfaced suggesting that 2 planes were shot down that day. Flight 17 was shot down by a Sukhoi fighter. The Sukhoi fighter was then shot down by the Eastern Ukrainian rebels. But they're basically saying that, yes, there was a fighter trailing that Flight 17. There's another report out saying that the Dutch investigators have looked very carefully at the damage done to the remains of Flight 17 and concluded that the most likely weapon used against that aircraft was a Python air-to-air missile, which is manufactured and sold by Israel. So the Buk ground-to-air missile seems to be off the hook for that one. Now, I've had a lot of people tell me that this is absolutely a dead end and a red herring, but I'm not ready to let go of this. We know that Vladimir Putin's presidential aircraft was flying in the same area at the same time as Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. We have the statements that somebody who came back from this mission, whatever, hopped out of the plane saying, I got the wrong target, they were where they shouldn't have been. Now, Vladimir Putin's presidential jet, nowhere near as grand as Air Force One, of course, because we're the superpower, is based on an Ilyushin passenger jet, and its paint scheme is very, very similar to the livery for Malaysian Airlines. So if somebody went up there with a plan to assassinate Putin, to throw the Russian republics into turmoil while Kiev reconquered the eastern Ukrainian republics, it is not beyond the realm of possibility that they got the wrong aircraft. They saw Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, thought it was the Ilyushin, and shot it down. Because any aircraft that's up there aiming for Putin, they're not going to be in radio contact with the ground out of fear of being overheard. They're not going to be using any active radar transponder systems for the same reason. They're supposed to be invisible. And it could very well be that it was a botched attempt to assassinate Putin. Alrighty, let's see. Now then, obviously we're in the midst of another one of these very carefully, well not so carefully, staged, managed false flag hoaxes. They're already out there saying, yes, the shooter in Chattanooga, it's a now terrorist incident, we're investigating everything. And it's got all the hallmarks of another one of these Boston bombings, Sandy Hook, 9/11, theater productions to get us ready to go to war. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get into Chattanooga, before we get to these phone calls that are waiting right now, I do want to leap back here to the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting because more information has surfaced about that. Now, as you know, the Sandy Hook shooting occurred on December 14th, 2012. Adam Lanza and guns and, you know, all this stuff. And there's a lot of reason to think this is another hoax. There is a considerable body of evidence that the Sandy Hook Elementary School wasn't an active school. Okay, it had been shut down. If you go back to the Internet Wayback Machine and look at the traffic going in and out of the domain, it stops at 2008. And it turns out that Sandy Hook School was shut down in 2008 because of asbestos contamination. Payroll records for the school district do not show any salaries being paid for anybody at Sandy Hook. Now, the legal requirement for handicapped signage was changed in 2009, but if you go back to all those photos and videos of the Sandy Hook School taken in 2012, they're all showing the signage from before the mandated 2009 change. In other words, they've got outdated signs all over the place. And there's no way a school, an operating school, would not be in compliance with the 2009 requirements. Plus, anybody looking at the pictures are saying, wow, that place is dirty. It's just mold all over the wall. It just doesn't look like it's being cared for. And, of course, it wasn't. That's basically the whole issue. It was another U.S. government hoax, like torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, Lusitania, Pearl Harbor. How many times do you have to be lied to, Saddam's nuclear weapons, before you understand this is how the government tries to control you? All right, let's grab a couple of real quick phone calls here. Terry down in Texas, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, aloha. I'm getting ready to move there. I'm deciding between Maui and Oahu. But that MH17 flight, I was wondering, I have a couple of questions. If Putin was flying over that area, it would seem he would have a complement of military aircraft watching his six or something like that. I was just wondering if you had anything about that. Also, I don't know if you went through it today. I got in late, but there was a lie detector test given to a witness where where an alleged pilot who had landed came back with his pods empty, and he said he had shot the plane or shot the wrong plane.
Shot the wrong plane, yeah, and the guy passed the lie detector test. Yeah, I was aware of that.
Yeah.
Now, as far as fighter escort for a presidential aircraft, the problem is that fighters don't really have that kind of range. And the general way these things operate when you are not in a wartime situation, which Russia technically was not at the time, is there'll be a fighter escort on departure, and then once the presidential plane is at altitude, the fighters from the departing airport will go back home, and then as the plane approaches its destination, fighters will come up from that for the escort in. Well, we've seen that here in Hawaii when Obama comes out for his Christmas vacations. They'll scramble fighters to basically escort him in, but that's basically it. In the middle of the flight, unless there is a known threat, they don't bother with that.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate that. Now then, on another issue too, I was wondering about shooting on Putin. That would have been a bad idea, but
not from Kiev's point of view.
So, right. But regarding sunspots, I think I sent you emails on this, and it seems that I don't know if you and I are on opposite text. I wrote a thing on Zero Hedge about this. It would seem that sunspots, I look at them as vents, and they radiate less. And if you recall a couple of years ago when we had zero sunspot activity down here in Houston, we had my analogy was if you're walking by two ovens and one of them has a vent and one of them doesn't, the one that doesn't have a vent radiates more heat. And I was wondering, and I have some, I'll have to look it up. I'll have to look it up in Zero Hedge. It might be archived right now, but it seems that
okay. Well, Terry, let me interrupt you here because that's not how sunspots work. They're still white hot. They're just darker compared to the background of the sun. And actually, an oven with a vent will allow more heat to escape. The real issue isn't the sunspot itself. It's the sunspot as a symptom of the instability of the sun's magnetosphere, which in turn influences how much solar wind and radiation is coming out, which has all kinds of impacts here. Terry, I need to let you go. We're running out of time. I want to get down here to Scott in Texas. Scott, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I was just going to remind everybody also about the Sandy Hook thing, that all the parents seem to have their mortgages paid off on Christmas Eve, and it was completely wiped out. That was just something it was just
yeah, Santa Claus came into town and tore up all the mortgage papers, and yeah, that was a real good thing for all those people in Sandy Hook. Yeah, it's a real good. And remember, the FBI's official crime database for 2012 says nothing happened in Sandy Hook the whole year.
Yeah, nobody died. So, it just doesn't add up. But, hey, I was the guy that also told you, that I'm helping you promote, your word because I had a video go viral. So I put a speech bubble in there. Like the guy yesterday was, he goes around and talks to everybody. However anybody needs to do to help promote, the people that they support, just do it,
Yeah, it's a grassroots effort. We get no corporate media support. Obviously, they hate our guts. We're cutting to their audience. We're not getting big bucks from Exxon or Pfizer or any of those giant corporations. They're pouring their millions of dollars onto people like Brian Williams, who, even though he's exposed as a liar, is still getting $8 million a year to go on lying to the American people. And those of us out here in the truth movement, we're running on fumes out here. We'll be very honest. I don't make any money at all from this radio show. And, what we get to support our work here comes into the website, whatreallyhappened.com, through donations and ad revenues. The good news is I'm starting to attract a better quality of advertiser, and so we're going through a change there. The way we're going to get the word about this out is on social media and face-to-face contact. It's a true grassroots movement for the truth, because the government hates the truth. They fear the truth. The corporate media's entire business is selling lies. and they hate the truth. So it's really a fight between we the people and the liars. That's really what it is.
Well, we the people we're not stupid. They think we forget all this stuff. We don't forget. So, everything that they do just proves beyond a shadow of a doubt how big of a liar and how corrupt the system is. And when people get fed up, when their backs get up against the wall, they have to recoil. Even a small dog will bite when it's cornered. So keep up the good work, and I'll let you go.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the kind words and for the phone call. All right. So let's get on back to this Chattanooga false flag. And already the official story is in trouble because the FBI came out earlier today and said that they'd been tracking the Chattanooga shooter's family for years. We were keeping an eye on him. And then people stood up and said, okay, then why didn't you stop this guy? Then the FBI backtracked and made the claim that the Chattanooga shooter himself was not on the terrorism radar. He was not in any federal database. And then people said, well, doesn't that prove that all these databases don't work? And so now the story has changed yet again, where the FBI is saying, well, those earlier statements were premature. We're still looking through all the databases to see if we can find him. And, of course, my question there is, just how big are those terror suspect lists anyway? Because even if you have all 300 million Americans on the terror suspect database, a machine search for the name is not going to take that long. But they're just flipping the story back and forth. Not too surprisingly, the Republicans are out there saying that Obama's policies are responsible for Chattanooga and a rise in domestic terrorism, which in the context of these attacks being staged false flag hoaxes is actually kind of accurate. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the Chattanooga shooting. And, the media is just pounding this. It's not news reporting. It's a propaganda. It's a sales campaign. They're out there. Cities are on alert after the gunman goes on shooting rampage in Tennessee. And because of all the other hoaxes that have now been exposed, whether it's TWA 800, well, that was a cover-up of an accident. Sandy Hook, 9/11, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. The list is endless at this point. Everyone's first assumption is this is just more of the same. We live under a government that gets what it wants with lies, fraud, and deception. And they're still doing it because they don't know any other way. They have gotten away with ruling the people of the United States of America for so many generations with lies, fraud, and deception. They absolutely do not know how to run this nation the way it was run when it started. And I'm not the only person who's out there saying that. Over at the Common Sense Show, they're saying this Chattanooga event is a CIA false flag operation. That's the assumption. The burden of proof is on the government to prove they are telling us the truth. We don't need to prove they're lying. Their track record speaks for itself. And we've got known propagandists like Rita Katz and Pamela Geller are all over the social media saying, oh, it was ISIS. It was linked to ISIS. Got the same players out there pushing this stuff. Now, have you noticed how the gun grabbers actually helped this shooting to occur? By lobbying for gun-free zones. Did you see all over the front of all the buildings where these Marines got killed? Guns are banned in this facility. And these are people who know how to use guns, who could have shot back and defended themselves skillfully and accurately. But, oh, no, we can't let them have guns. Guns are bad. And those 4 Marines are dead as much because of this anti-gun hysteria as this patsy that they've set up. This idea that guns are banned on military facilities, that's absurd. These are the people who know how to use them. These are people who have put on the uniform of the United States Armed Forces and sworn an oath to do what they're told by the government. These are the people who should be most trusted with guns. Unless, of course, our government is terrified of the military waking up. That may have happened at Fort Hood with that shooting, but they found a convenient Muslim they could blame it on here. All right, we're going to take ourselves a phone call. Keith in Montana, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I had a couple of things for you there, Michael, and aloha to you too. One was at the FBI crime statistics page for page 8 on Newtown. It shows 0 deaths or homicides for the entire town for the whole year in 2012.
Yes.
And the other thing is, this hoax about terrorism. Americans have to finally get off of this thing that our prisons are full. The FBI shootings, the police shootings, the credit protection, the credit card protection, the decades of MDA, Cancer Society, and the Diabetes Foundation bilking Americans for billions of dollars on we're this close to a cure. I mean, everything in this country is Americans, like the prisons are full, everything like that, It's all Americans doing this to Americans. Terrorism is our least thing to worry about in this country.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're much more likely to be murdered by a police officer than by a terrorist.
Yeah, I mean, I
actually, you're more likely to die in a shark attack than by a terrorist.
Well, yeah, I mean, seriously though, North Korea is no threat. Iran, Russia, China, none of them are threats. It's the people. And
it's not even the American people. It's the American government, because every time they get into one of these self-created economic messes, they get into a World War to deal with it. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. And here we are on the brink of what is likely to become a nuclear conflict.
Yeah. I was going to say another thing. We have very few black people up here in Montana. Every time I see one, I always ask them, what did you think about this shooting or something like that? And I give them, after I get their answer like that, I says, well, do you think this was staged? I says, because seriously, I says, how many white friends do you have? And they go on a list, And I says, we grew up years ago playing ball together and stuff, whether they were Japanese, Korean, blacks, Mexicans. We had no problem with racism. And in fact, they voted my cousin Obama into office, But the fact is it's all manufactured, and it's a constant phobia from the outside when we should be looking at ourselves on the inside.
Divide and conquer. It's divide and conquer. They were doing it back in the 1960s. COINTELPRO went out. The FBI's COINTELPRO operation went out and deliberately carried out acts to get the black population and the white population angry with each other, to keep them squabbling amongst themselves instead of uniting in the common purpose of ending the war in Vietnam. The FBI came out with hoaxes like the Black Panther coloring book. They infiltrated the Black Panthers and committed illegal violent acts to discredit them. They staged that the hippie riot at Disneyland was all done by the FBI on orders from the Nixon White House. This is how the government runs the country. Lies, fraud, and deception.
Yeah, and that's why I always tell you, Mike, or try to remind you, never use the pluralism, because this government no longer represents we the people.
I try and avoid that. It's a bad habit, but I try and stipulate the government versus we the people, because I'm sort of in the Jeffersonian model here. I am loyal to my fellow American citizens, okay? I'm only going to be loyal to the government when it deserves it, and it hasn't for quite a long time.
Yeah, that's right. All right, well, hey, aloha to you there, Mike, and my best to you and Claire, okay?
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. All right, turning to other recent events. Over in Greece, the situation is still very tense. A lot of protests going on all across the country. And we are already hearing, even though the Greek parliament got bought, bribed, blackmailed, whatever, to vote through this new round of austerity despite the vast majority of the Greek people being opposed, the deal may be falling apart from the other side. Schäuble is out there saying that a Grexit still may be the better option. Everybody who's looked at this plan, including the IMF itself, is saying it can't actually work. It's a fairy tale. It's make-believe. Oh, we have a plan to keep Greece in the Euro and the European Union, and it's all going to be wonderful, and it cannot be made to work. Now, over in Greece, Lapavitsas, Kostas Lapavitsas, is saying that the Syriza plan that they campaigned on and were elected on called for radical changes in the relations between Greece and the Eurozone. And as these negotiations proved, that's impossible. The money junkies maintain their hard-line approach to Greece because they don't dare cut Greece any slack on the debt without having all of the other member states of the European Union stand up and demand the same thing, because Greece is not alone in these debt problems. There are 24 other nations that are hovering on the edge of default, another 14 headed downward. This is growing. And so now there are calls for a Grexit from within the Greek government. Marina Prentoulis is out there saying that what is needed is a pan-European anti-austerity movement. For all of these anti-austerity movements in Greece and Spain and Italy and France and everything to unite together all at once and say, no more austerity, no more private central banking, none of this rule by compound interest crap any longer, because it's simply not working for the people. Great for the bankers, great for the money junkies, great for the slave masters, for the new feudalists. Terrible for the people, and I'm in agreement with that. Rule by bank debt is no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by slavery or rule by divine right. And like those prior failed systems, it only works as long as people let themselves be brainwashed into thinking this is the way the world needs to be, or is supposed to be. And you need to become a private central bank heretic. Stop believing in what's going on. By the way, calls for a boycott against Germany over its harsh treatment of Greece are now trending higher on Twitter than the attempt to boycott Greece. That's falling off the radar. Everyone's saying, time to boycott all German products, which is okay. I couldn't afford a Mercedes-Benz anyway. We'll be right back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. I was going around the dial on the corporate TV news media. It's all Chattanooga all the time. And it's almost like they're out there saying, you got to believe us. We're telling you the truth this time. It really was an act of terror. It really was ISIS. You got to believe us, really. And they're just pounding as hard as they can. And the more they pound, the more obvious it is. This is a propaganda campaign. It's a sales campaign. It's public relations. It's not news reporting. They're just trying to overwhelm Americans. Think Chattanooga. Pay no attention to what's happening over with Iran or Greece or all those other things. Be afraid of ISIS. They're going to get you unless you do what we tell you. Now, Israel and AIPAC are not even trying to hide the fact that they are out to destroy this Iran deal any way they can. Apparently, Israel and AIPAC are no longer concerned that the rest of the world is going to come to see Washington, D.C. as a puppet regime ruling the United States of America on behalf of Tel Aviv. They don't care anymore. AIPAC is saying they're going to go head-to-head with the White House in Congress. Congress is working for AIPAC, and they're going to use Congress as a bludgeon to go after Obama, because how dare he make a peace deal without Israel's permission. That's just not done. AIPAC has canceled all staff summer vacations. They're bringing everybody in and saying you're going to be working long hours until we get this done here. And they're out there saying, they actually came out and said Obama did this without the agreement of the Israeli government. Well, I think the Israeli government should mind its own business. I almost put an obscenity in there. Now, the latest wrinkle coming out of this is that the Iran P5+1 deal is on its way to the United Nations for a resolution there. Now, Congress voted itself the right for a 2-month review of the Iran deal. And they're concerned that a United Nations vote may come up before that 2 months is over. Because if the UN votes through a resolution saying this is a good deal, it makes the Congress look that much worse for saying, no, we don't agree. Israel told us to kill this deal. We're going to kill this deal. Mahi dictum est. And if there is a UN resolution approving this deal, ratifying this deal, and it's going to go to the General Assembly where the United States does not have a veto, then all the Congress can really do is pull the United States out of the deal. They can't kill the deal itself, and that will leave the United States as the lone rogue, cut off from Iran's oil market, cut off from Iranian markets for American goods, and that's really all they can do. And Congress doesn't seem to mind that they are now fully on display to the world and the voters as working for a foreign government. Now, they're bringing in all their prostitutes and correspondents in the corporate media to try and get this thing going. Somebody just sent me this commercial. There's a group, United Against Nuclear Iran, and they are running this commercial all over. I've seen it several times already on Fox News. Iran is a danger. Iran is a threat. You've got to call your members of Congress and tell them to kill this deal. Hail Israel, whatever it is. So over at the Israel National News, they've got this guy, David Rubin, who's out there saying, we've got 5 reasons to attack Iran. He's out there saying, they're doing this, they're doing that, we've got, blah, blah, blah. He's not saying Israel should attack Iran. I mean, he makes a mention about it. His goal is to get American sons and American daughters to go fight Israel's war for them, because their own children are just way too precious to risk in a war against Iran. And so my response to David Rubin and anybody else who's out there still calling for war with Iran, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit, watch your head getting into the plane. We're going to call Tehran and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself. And I went down all the list of all the lies we've ever been told to get us to fight in a war someplace. I mentioned the Lavon affair, the attack on the USS Liberty, which was initially blamed on Egypt. And a very alert reader actually sent in an image of an Israeli newspaper from 1984 with the banner headline, Iranian nuclear bomb enters final manufacturing phase. This was back in 1984. That Israel was saying, oh, they're just weeks away from a bomb. We've got to kill them. Well, we've got to get the Americans to go kill them for us. Iran has not launched a war of aggression against another nation in over 200 years. Contrast that with Israel and the U.S., which these days can't seem to go 6 months without killing somebody somewhere. We know who the aggressors are. And they're still out there apparently thinking that the American people are so stupid and dumbed down and moronic and common cord that if they just shout at us loud enough and long enough, Iran's the bad guy, that we will just somehow magically believe it. Those tactics do not work anymore. They're using the playbook from the height of the Cold War in the 1950s and 1960s, and that playbook only works if you have a naive, trusting population that just accepts what they're told by the government and the media at face value, and that reality is gone. It's actually working to our advantage that they can't seem to adapt to the new reality of a skeptical, aware, educated public, a global internet which gives us a collective history outside government intervention. By the way, over in Israel, there's a protocol they follow for all visiting dignitaries, which currently includes a mandatory visit to Herzl's grave and Yad Vashem to get their dose of Holocaust propaganda. They're now going to expand that so that every diplomat visiting Israel will also be taken to the Western Wall where they can get their picture taken with the yarmulke for their campaigns back home. How very, very nice. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Al in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi,
Al, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, what's on your mind?
Oh, okay. First of all, my wife and I were watching your show from yesterday when that English fellow Toby called in.
Yes.
And I'm telling you right now, we were laughing so hard when you did that double take when he mentioned, how reputable the BBC was. We actually rewound it about 6 or 7 times. It was so funny. I don't know whether you realize it or not, but some of your mannerisms and some of your comments are so hilarious. Anyway, I know you don't like, compliments too often, but I had to point that out because it was great.
Well, thank you.
Well, you're very, very welcome. My second thing is concerning this Greece debt. Now, I don't know whether you've ever broken it down like this, and I don't think it's that important, but it just points something out that it's approximately $320 billion of debt. Greece is loaded with, I think.
Something along that line. Yeah, plus the accumulating interest.
Yes. And they have, just over 11 million people. The United States is, holding fast at about 18 trillion, and there are about 320 million. The Greece debt is, if you look at it, in population terms,
per capita terms,
only half.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's only half of the United States. I mean, obviously the GDP is higher and all that, but no one really points that out.
Oh, it's politically incorrect to mention that. Yeah, it is. We're on that list of nations that are in trouble for this whole debt-based economic system. And the reason nobody is threatening to foreclose on the U.S. just yet, of course, is that we have the big army and the nuclear weapons. Greece does not.
And a printing press.
And we have the printing press, which Greece does not. And that printing press is the downfall of all of these systems here because, actually, I'm going to talk about this when I come back from the next commercial break. Thank you for the call. Al, we'll let you go here. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, getting on back to the Greek debt situation. Yesterday, we were talking about this court case that happened back in 1968 involving an attempt by a bank to foreclose on a home because the homeowner had fallen behind on his payments after 3 years. The homeowner went into court, and he made the case to the jury that the bank did not actually provide anything of value. All it did was write a number in a ledger out of thin air. The bank's own lawyers said, yes, that's what we do. When we give you a loan, we just write a number on a piece of paper, but you are expected to work to pay that plus interest back. And under contract law, an obligation traded as part of the contract is called consideration. And absent actual consideration, there is no contract. And the jury found for the defendant. I'm sorry, they found for the homeowner. And the homeowner's lawyer was then disbarred. The judge poisoned a few months later, and the court decision was nullified through procedural processes. Now, all nullification does is say you can't cite this as a precedent in any future court cases. I mean, the bank basically admitted in 1968 there was no law that allowed them to create money out of thin air. Only the U.S. Treasury can create money out of thin air, which is what the Treasury bonds do. They print those up, send them to the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve creates paper notes or types into a computer, sends it back. But all the banks are constantly creating money out of thin air to loan out, which you must repay with your slave labor at full force. Basically, all the bank did was give this guy permission to live in the house. And when they foreclose and they come back and say bank owned, really, why does the bank own it? What did the bank actually spend to get it? And the answer is nothing. Well, that has to apply to Greece because the European Central Bank, the IMF, the World Bank do not actually trade anything of that. They didn't give anything of any value to Greece. They just typed numbers into a computer and said, we are now going to give Greece so many million euros permission to conduct their business with our imperial blessing. That's how modern banking works. It's not the model you were taught banking is, where banks will take deposits and loan those deposits back out. Actual money of value. Modern American banking, modern private central banking, is basically a giant fraud. They're not risking anything whatsoever. It's just numbers on paper with which they enslave individuals, Greece, all of Europe, all of America. And I'm glad to see that court case we posted yesterday is already going viral. Other websites are picking that up and putting it out, saying, yeah, when you go to the bank and you beg and plead and bow and you wear your best clothing and you make all these promises and try and polish your little slave chain called your credit rating, and the bank graciously gives you permission to have a car or a house, The bank doesn't actually spend anything. They just write a number on a piece of paper or type it into a computer. That's it. That's all they're risking. That's all they really risk. Just something to think about. This may be why Henry Ford once made the comment that if the American people really understood how the banking system works, there'd be a revolution by sunrise. And there may be in Greece. In fact, right now, remember we were talking about the contagion from Greece isn't just monetary, it's political. And that dimension is still very much in play. It doesn't matter what the bankers have said. We've settled all the matters with Greece's economy. They can't contain the political contagion that's already taking place from that. Now then, down in Syria, Britain has admitted its pilots are conducting airstrikes into Syria, ostensibly against ISIS, but they keep hitting Syrian infrastructure. The strikes were done in secrecy. The British people didn't know about it. Apparently, even Parliament didn't know about it. Apparently, Prime Minister David Cameron did not bother getting approval from Parliament for the airstrikes, which he's supposed to do. Britain is also giving Saudi Arabia more bombs to drop on the people of Yemen for the effrontery of rejecting their U.S. puppet ruler. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, we're looking at a full-blown global debt crisis. 24 nations are currently facing a debt crisis, 14 more rapidly heading towards one. And it's all because of that 11th marble. It's all because of the fundamental design flaw in the private central bank model. Because when you have a privately owned central bank that issues all of the public currency as a loan at interest, it creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt. And the debt grows and grows and grows until it crashes the system. And all the real assets of the nation and its people are in the pockets of the bankers. The fire sale in Greece is already underway. Major assets are already transferred to the European Union control. Now, Yellen has come out with a statement that borders on admitting the U.S. economy is still too weak to raise interest rates. They keep talking about, yes, time to raise rates. We really can't. Actually, they really can't, because the instant they raise the rates, the stock market's going to implode because it's being kept up with all this almost free money that is being showered all over Wall Street to keep buying up stocks and bonds as fast as people are dumping them to make it look like it's still working. Yellen is still out there saying that, no, we don't need congressional oversight over the nation's economy. It would hurt the economy. We've heard this paraphrase before. If you interfere with our little private central banking scam, we'll crash the economy, and we'll blame you for it. The bankers who plotted the 1933 coup d'etat against Franklin Roosevelt used that threat effectively. Roosevelt wanted to arrest them all, throw them in prison, and they just said, you can't. You arrest any one of us, we'll crash the economy, destroy your New Deal, and we'll make sure the media blames you for it. Roosevelt had to sit on his hands until the start of World War II, where he was able to nail these bankers under the Trading with the Enemies Act, because they were all financing Adolf Hitler's rise to power. Because war is big business for banks. It's the bankers' richest harvest of debt. Bankers love war. They don't even care which side wins or loses, because they make money off of both sides. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, China has just announced a major increase in their official gold reserves, 57%. They're buying gold as fast as they can, as long as the market riggers are keeping gold and silver prices down. China taking advantage of it. Russia taking advantage of it. You should be taking advantage of it as well. And by the way, given that they are apparently rerunning those episodes of America's Book of Secrets, you might want to look for the episode The Gold Conspiracy. And I'm not suggesting that just because I'm in it, but because everything that we mentioned in that show has since been proven to have been accurate. They're playing fast and loose with other people's gold. Now they're stuck. And at some point, I'm fully expecting the U.S. government to repeat Roosevelt's ban on the private ownership of gold coins and gold bars. Say, turn them in. We'll give you lots and lots of stacks of that ink and paper stuff. Now, a story coming out of the Daily Mail. Okay, and this is telling you how this whole outsourcing thing has just gotten completely out of control. Goodyear has a tire factory in the Midlands in Great Britain. And Goodyear is basically shutting down production there in Great Britain because too many taxes, too much regulatory compliance. And Goodyear is graciously offering all of these people who are losing their jobs that they'd be happy to give them new jobs at their new factory, which happens to be 5,000 miles away in a crime-ridden Mexican city. Wonderful, wonderful deal. The flaw with all of that thinking, we've seen that here in the United States of America. All these companies leapt on to offshoring because they could get their products cheaper into the stores. And then all of a sudden they discovered nobody was coming into the stores to buy the products. Why? Well, because they didn't have jobs anymore. Somehow, all these college-trained, brilliant CEOs all across America seem to have forgotten that their employees collectively are also their customers. I guess the attitude, this comes right out of Adam Smith. I'm going to fire my employees, but everybody else is going to keep their employees, and they're going to be my customers, and I'll make out like a bandit. And it did work briefly when it was just a few companies doing this. But when it became an epidemic across the entire economy, the consumer economy collapsed. And prior to the crash of 2008, consumer spending was 60% of the American economy. You cannot let your employees go without also letting your customers go. That is so obvious. I don't understand why the money junkies on Wall Street didn't see it, or why the government didn't step in and say, hey, this economy is going to lock up unless Americans are able to earn decent wages and salaries with which to go back into the shopping malls and buy the stuff you want to sell. It's almost like they all know a crash is coming, and they're just grabbing what they can get while they can get it. Nobody's thinking long term. That much is obvious here. Now, getting on to politics, Perry is out there, shouting at Trump over this, this politically incorrect idea of saying that illegal immigrants, are some of them are going to be criminals and rapists and molesters, even though the crime rates show that Trump is bang spot on. And everybody who's out there bashing on Trump, in fact, this music star named Pitbull is out there saying, I'm supporting, all of these people that Trump is bashing on, which means Pitbull is basically supporting the criminal class. Because Trump's issue is not with legal immigrants who come into this nation through the legal channels, get the medical checkup, and prove they're going to follow the rules and be good citizens. Trump does not have an issue with them. Trump, and a lot of Americans apparently, including this one, does have a problem with illegal immigrants sneaking across the border, not getting medical checks, and then being basically ignored by Obama's immigration policy. And yes, a lot of them are criminals fleeing prosecution in their own home. A lot of them are carrying contagious diseases. A lot of them are bringing drugs with them to get a financial lift up in their new home. And they're getting treated by the U.S. government better than the legal American citizens right now. Trump continues to lead the polls of the GOP contenders, and every week that goes by, his lead increases because he's out there talking about the things that are important to us. He's not seeking refuge in the manufactured fringe issues that decorate every election campaign. And there's a backlash happening in support of Donald Trump. Macy's responded to Trump's comments about illegal immigration problems by refusing to carry his branded line of neckties in their store. This apparently triggered 30,000 customer complaints. So the backlash is happening. Stores that are not carrying Trump's products, companies that are breaking their contracts with Trump, they're going to feel a consumer backlash here. Meanwhile, over in the Jeb Bush campaign, apparently Goldman Sachs is pouring money all over his campaign. They're just as scared of Donald Trump as anybody else in the political system. And they're opening up their checkbooks. Jeb Bush is their boy. And he's already out there proving he's another Mitt Romney with that comment about the only thing wrong with the economy is that Americans aren't willing to work more than 40 hours a week, which shows how clueless and out of touch he is. Now, over at INFOWARS, they had this wonderful video. It's done by Mark Dice, who sort of made a reputation of going on out, asking really absurd questions on a video camera, and finding apparently some real Common Core graduates to come on in and talk about dumb things. And his question this time was, should Mount Rushmore be torn down because it's racist? They're all white guys. 2 of them own slaves and so forth. And apparently he was able to find a lot of people saying, oh, yes, Mount Rushmore should be torn down and the faces should be replaced with known gays or what. And just, you look at these videos and you scratch your head and say, you know, do Americans really deserve the government that they're getting? Now, the White House official who was in charge of the Obamacare rollout, okay, remember the disastrous Obamacare website, the White House official in charge of all that, Marilyn Tavenner, former director of healthcare.gov, has now been hired as a health insurance lobbyist. It's a little revolving door between corporate interests and the U.S. government. They just flip back and forth. Pentagon, defense contractors, White House lobbyists. It just goes back and forth to churn up more and more money for the involved parties. Now, over in Great Britain, they're looking at the mass surveillance laws that have been imposed on their people, like we have mass surveillance on us. And apparently, Britain's High Court ruled that Sections 1 and 2 of the surveillance law are in fact unlawful because they breach Articles 7 and 8 of the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights, which isn't going to stop the mass surveillance in Britain any more than the fact that the NSA is violating the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution has stopped them from spying on you and me and everybody else. We have to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about all these draconian dictatorships that are emerging all across the modern world. And up in New York, they're getting ready to try and pass a law that would turn resisting arrest from a misdemeanor to a felony, meaning jail time. Now, the statement that came out from the politicians promoting this is to send a message to New Yorkers that they may not resist arrest under any circumstances. Now, this flies in the face of a United States Supreme Court decision, John Badelt versus United States, that ruled when the police are acting outside the letter of the law and the Constitution, citizens do have a legal right to resist up to including the use of lethal force. Now, I got an email from a listener chastising me saying that the current idea is that this is not good law. An actual statement in quotes, not considered good law. And my response to that is, not considered good law in quotes is not legally binding. It's just another excuse for the government to say, well, all those old Supreme Court decisions don't mean anything anymore. You shouldn't pay attention to them. Which is complete and utter nonsense. Remember when Aaron Russo was making his documentary, America, Freedom to Fascism, and he was talking to the head of the Internal Revenue Service about Supreme Court decisions saying that what the IRS was doing was illegal. And the head of the IRS said, oh, come on, that was a long time ago. You can't think a Supreme Court decision from all those years ago has any bearing today. Yeah, actually they do. Until the Supreme Court reverses the decision is pertinent right up to the present moment. They really are pushing for a police state. We all recognize it. We know it. Now, here's a very interesting story. Up in Vancouver, to deal with the threat, if you will, of thieves attacking people in wheelchairs, an undercover police officer basically for 5 days wheeled himself in a wheelchair around the downtown East Side district, telling everybody that he had a brain injury, he couldn't count, and he had a waist wallet that actually had money just literally hanging out of it. I mean, talk about entrapment. He didn't actually find any thieves. What he found were Vancouver citizens who wanted to help him, tuck the money back in, gave him more money, wanted to help him get where he wanted to go. And I think there's a lesson there that ordinary citizens of these countries, United States, Canada, Great Britain, are still decent, caring, kind people. These police entrapment sting operations, or FBI set up a patsy, are the cause of all the perceived and reported crime. Now, we've been talking about the F-35. The potential new chairman of the Joint Chiefs is saying it's time to reevaluate whether we want to buy this thing or not. And apparently the supporters of the F-35 are now out there saying that all of the software problems with the F-35, they're not a problem. They're not going to stop the plane from flying in combat because they've come up with workarounds for the pilots. So when the pilots are flying the F-35 and something isn't working correctly, they can type this in, they can turn this, they can do this plug to get it to do what it's supposed to do in the middle of combat. It's not a problem. We'll make the pilots figure out how to make it work. Now, it's one thing when a software company drops an operating system on you and you've got to use workarounds to get anything done. But to demand the pilots in the middle of a dogfight or a war actually stop what they're doing to work out a workaround to a software problem, that is a little unrealistic, I think. And I'm wondering how these pilots are feeling about being sent into combat in this aircraft with a little cheat list of when you try and engage the enemy and this stuff doesn't work, you need to go around here and do this. I sometimes think we would be well served if all the people in the Pentagon who pushed for a given weapon systems were the first ones sent into combat with that system. There have been hideous scandals. Remember when Armalite first came up with what eventually became the M16, and it was a clearly superior weapon. And the Pentagon put it out for field trials in Vietnam and deliberately used the wrong ammunition, the wrong propellant in the ammunition. They used a propellant that was known to cause fouling, had the wrong burn rates, and not surprisingly, the guns jammed, and American kids got killed. And the people who were promoting the M14 rifle were saying, see, it doesn't work, and yes, we got to look at all those dead kids. We've got to go with the M14, which is manufactured by my good friends over here. And Congress got involved for once, had honest evaluations done of the two designs, and that's why the M16 became the core of a whole family of weapons from then to now. And even then, the Pentagon still threw a tantrum, because if you have one of these M16 derivative weapons, the AR-14, you've probably noticed on the right-hand side, there's this little bolt sticking out at an angle. And the gun doesn't really need it. Most shooters never use that. It's there basically to hammer the bolt home in case the gun does foul, which if you're using the correct gun propellant, it never does. But the Pentagon insisted that be added because soldiers wanted to feel they had a bolt like the old rifles of World War II, which increased the cost of the gun to the taxpayer. It is absurd. Alrighty, so we're coming up here on the top of the hour news break, and just real quick nod to Human Caused Global Warming. They are having a monster winter down south of the equator. They're getting record snow and record cold in Australia and New Zealand. Huge amounts of snow all across South America. And still, we have the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration is out there insisting 2014 was Earth's warmest year on record. And that is absolute nonsense, because it was much warmer during the Roman and medieval warming periods. It was even warmer than that in the 1930s. We've had several record-setting winters in a row, and NOAA is absolutely convinced that if they line up a bunch of well-paid scientists and a bunch of pretty charts, they're going to convince you that all that snow and ice you saw last winter was just a figment of your imagination. The world is warming. You've got to pay a carbon tax. I mean, that's the scale of the lie we're getting here. Yes, sirree, Bob, humans are warming the Earth. You're going to have to pay a carbon tax, and while we're at it, unemployment is only 5.6%. Obamacare works. The economy is fine if you'll just spend more money and work longer hours. Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, and the Greek people are lazy idiots drunk on ouzo who deserve what they got. It's amazing. Looking at the corporate media, they lie about everything except the weather and the sports scores, and they're not even all that good about the weather. It is amazing. Now, as you know, the New Horizons spacecraft just whizzed by Pluto. It marks the end of the era of the initial exploration of our entire solar system. For those of us who grew up in the space age, it was a thrilling moment. But as usual, we're getting all of these individuals out there saying, well, shouldn't you have spent that money on something else? We could have taken that money and accomplished all kinds of cool things here on Earth. Well, actually, we did. It's not like we loaded all that money onto a rocket and flung it out to the stars. And even if we had, it's just ink and paper. That money was spent here on Earth, and it wasn't all that much, because they cost less than one of these new sports stadiums that John Oliver was talking about at taxpayer expense. It wasn't that expensive a mission, and it developed new technologies, gave a lot of college graduates jobs with which to pay their student loans. They spent less to go to Pluto than it cost to produce the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. It cost less than the cost of spam emails. Spam emails are costing us all $20 billion per year. Nobody seems to want to do anything about that. Cyber criminals are costing us $7-8 billion a year in lost productivity. Nobody seems to complain about that. But they're going to whine and cry about this $750 million and a trip to Pluto. We'll be right back after the news. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Looking back over various and sundry news items, there is protesting, rioting, civil unrest breaking out all over Greece. It's not just Athens. The Greek people are furious. They voted in a political party that was supposed to be anti-austerity. They overwhelmingly voted in a referendum against austerity, only to have their government sell them out to the bankers. They're very, very angry. And what makes it infuriating to them all the more is the growing realization that this bailout deal can't actually work. We're getting that from both sides. We're getting that from the IMF. We're getting it from Germany. Germany's already out there saying maybe a Grexit is a better idea. Now, Europe's leaders are looking at the issue of political contagion. Because if this deal doesn't work, they're worried about this anti-austerity truly becoming a Europe-wide situation. And eventually it's going to go global as more and more people understand that private central banking deliberately creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt to make you all their slaves. It's not about financing. It's not about economics. It is a tool to enslave the masses with their belief that this is the way banking is supposed to operate. Beliefs are the chains that hold free minds slaves. No chain of iron or steel ever bound a human being tighter than the chains made out of those beliefs with which we are indoctrinated as little children. Beliefs are your enemies. Beliefs are used against you to coerce your behavior, to get things from you, to get you to act as if something was true when it is provably false. Down in Puerto Rico, they've missed a major one of their bond payments. Nobody wants to pay attention with the corporate media because there are credit default swaps sold against those bonds. And the people holding those swaps want to be paid. The people who are selling the swaps are saying it's not a default. It's a deferred moratorium on the payment. You'll get your money somewhere 5, 10, 50, 100 years into the future, and therefore we don't have to make good on the credit default swap. And they can't do that much more without crashing the derivatives market as a whole. Their infrastructure is breaking down. They're dealing with severe water rationing. And there is a huge migration of Puerto Ricans coming to the United States of America, as if things are any better here. Now, at the end of the last hour, I was talking about the New Horizons project and how the money wasn't just flung out into space. It was used to, among other things, provide jobs to college graduates with which to repay those usurious student loans. But, according to this article I'm seeing over here in Government Slaves, there are $40 billion, with a B, dollars worth of AAA-rated student loans that are on the verge of becoming junk. We've reached a point right now where people don't want to acknowledge debts are bad. Debts can't be paid. As long as they pretend it's all okay, they can move them around and bundle them and resell them as if they're items of value. But they're not. They're completely void. They're empty. Meanwhile, up in Oregon, according to this article also from Government Slaves, Oregon Democrats want publicly funded scholarships for illegal aliens. Now, we have American citizens who had to borrow money to go to college and are now stuck with these incredible student debt loads, many of which are at risk of defaulting and popping the student loan bubble. But we can spend American taxpayer dollars providing scholarships for illegal immigrants who shouldn't be here in the first place. One of the reasons there is such a student loan problem is that because college stopped being about better jobs and became just another come-on to cram Americans onto that debt slavery hook. And at the same time we saw college costs soaring way out of proportion with the cost of inflation, we saw scholarships dry up. We don't want to give these people the money to go to school. We want to loan them the money to go to school. That way we get profit off of their education. But we're going to spend tax dollars providing scholarships for illegal immigrants. The illegal immigrants are getting a better deal from this government than the legal citizens who were born here. Does that make any sense at all to anybody? Donald Trump is right. It's time to make an issue of this. And I think that's the reason for Trump's popularity. And even I'm surprised at how well he's doing in the GOP polls. I understand why. But there's obviously a growing movement in America that it's time to stop dealing with all this politically correct nonsense, ignore it, and get back to the real world of what's gone wrong with this country. Now, Israel, as we mentioned before, they're in high dudgeon over the fact that Obama has gone along with this P5+1 deal with Iran without Israel's blessing, and Israel is out there, they're absolutely dedicated to killing this deal. But that has not stopped them from asking the U.S. government for an increase in military aid to protect poor, helpless Israel from the mighty warmongering Iran. Imagine my shock. Israel asking for more money. It's a force of nature. Doesn't matter what happens. Sky is blue, Israel asks for more money. Sky is gray, Israel asks for more money. Iran signs the P5+1, Israel asks for more money. Iran doesn't sign the P5+1, Israel asks for more money. It's amazing. Now, we have been talking recently about the fact that Texas has demanded the return of their state gold bullion from the New York Federal Reserve. Good luck getting it. They're building their own bullion center, and they're talking about starting their own state bank, like North Dakota has, that is going to be backed by that gold bullion. And this is significant because it's not merely Texas getting their economy back under their own control the way North Dakota did. It's not about Texas getting interest-free funding for public works development and not sticking the taxpayer with interest payments to private bankers. Texas is setting up their own internal economic foundation, and a lot of people are seeing this as an indicator that Texas is seriously considering secession somewhere down the road. And they're hardly alone in that. We've got multiple independence movements here in Hawaii, all of them growing out of the realization that the annexation and statehood of Hawaii was illegal under treaties in effect at the time. The U.S. government has formally apologized to Hawaii for stealing their country. They're not going to give it back, but they feel really bad. They put on the frowny face, had a bunch of indigenous Hawaiians to the White House for the signing of the public law. See, we're sorry. Take your paper, go back home. Back in the 1990s, there was a group, the Western States Coalition, wanted to basically break off the western part of the United States. There was even a resolution making the rounds through state legislatures called the Ultimatum Resolution, which is when the U.S. federal debt went above $6 trillion, the federal government was dissolved. They didn't get the necessary three-quarter state legislatures to sign on to that, or it would have happened. But this idea that the states are fed up with this central federal government is hardly unique to Texas, hardly unique to Hawaii, hardly unique to Alaska. It's a growing trend. The federal government is not a blessing. It is a curse on us all. We'll be back after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, welcome back to our show here now up at Portland State University. The state police there, the State University Police, have a new word they're using. It's called triggering, and we're starting to see it all over the country. Triggering is the new threshold for police activity. And I'm looking at this article, this is also from Government Slaves, how Portland State University will shut down political activity if it's considered triggering. In other words, will it provoke some kind of a response? Well, the whole point of any political activity is to provoke a response, to convince people that what they believed before may not be true. And so what they're basically saying is they're going to shut down any political activity which actually shows any indication of being effective. And I'm willing to bet that the pro-Israel students are behind this in a push to stop the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is spreading across all college campuses. Oh, this protest is going to trigger the boycott against Israel, therefore it must be shut down. Okay, let's see. Getting on back here. Lobbyists for Monsanto and ExxonMobil have collectively put another $2 million into the campaign of Hillary Clinton. And it's rather amazing. The carbon Nazis are out there. Every time you point out we've had all these record cold winters, every time you point out how it's obvious the data has been manipulated by NOAA or NASA or Penn State or Hadley CRU or IPCC, the first thing they say is, oh, you're obviously in the pay of ExxonMobil. That's the only reason you could ever doubt the most holy revealed dogma of St. Al of the Gore. And here we have Hillary getting checks from ExxonMobil. I don't know, maybe she's getting my checks. Maybe ExxonMobil was going to send me $1 million and somehow got lost in the mail. Kind of an interesting thing there. Now, down in Miami, the police are responding to a new mobile app called Waze that was put out there to allow people to report on the existence of speed traps. And if you think about it, it's really no different than truckers on the CB radios talking about radar traps here and there. Well, in a nation where the police department's budgets are now significantly made up of traffic ticket revenues, where they're being told you are a major source of revenue to the entire city, they don't want people to have anything that is going to get in the way of being pillaged and looted. And so now the Miami police have been caught sabotaging this application with fake submissions. Oh, no, the speed trap isn't over here on Main Street. It got moved to Elm, so you can go speeding on Main Street. And, of course, you walk right into the trap. And, by the way, the police used to do that on the CB radio. You'd see these county mountie cars out there, and they'd have the police radio, and bolted right underneath would be a CB. They'd be on Channel 19 and saying, oh, no, there's no Smokies between here and Las Vegas. You can put the pedal to the metal, good buddy. And, of course, you drive right into a speed trap. A lot of states now ban radar laser detectors in the car. And they like to claim, oh, it's because it encourages unsafe driving. No, it doesn't. You're hearing those little beeps about lasers and radars somewhere around you. You slow down. And there have been actual studies that showed drivers with these radar laser detectors, because they're constantly being reminded the police are around, actually do drive more slowly and more safely. But traffic safety isn't the issue here. Revenue generation is. We seem to have developed a cultural tolerance for dirty tricks by people in government. And we ought not to. We should hold government to a high standard. We should hold government to a higher standard even than we hold ourselves, because that's what the government is supposed to be, representing the best of what we are in order to guide the nation in a positive direction, as opposed to the direction we're going now, which is toward more crime, corruption, pillaging, looting, and so forth and so on. Not too surprisingly, and this is an article over in acclaimednews.com, public trust in the establishment has shattered. Their words, not mine. And they're reporting on all these polls coming out showing that public trust in politicians and the corporate media has been declining for decades. And they're saying, yes, it's all the fault of the independent media, dissidents, researchers, and activists. And they're saying that, yes, the majority of the American people have abandoned the corporate media and government statements and are coming here to the independent media, to the blogs, to find out what's really going on. People want the truth. They want to know that they're getting the truth, and they're going to go where they need to go to get it. They're not going to be lured back to Fox News by really gorgeous bimbettes in short, tight, revealing clothing. There's plenty of that all over the Internet. If that's what you're into, you don't need to listen to a news broadcast to see images and videos of sexy women. It's all over the blogs. Remember, in the former Soviet Union, one of the major factors that brought the Soviet Union down was the emergence of the samizdat, which was the name that was given to a public network made up not of computers, but of fax machines. Somebody would write an article, they'd put it in the fax machine, that fax machine was programmed to send it to 10 other fax machines, who would then send it to 10 more each. And it formed this ad hoc public communication network outside of Soviet government censorship. And they tried to break into it, tried to hijack it, tried to censor it. They couldn't, because it was decentralized. And the Russian people came to understand the extent to which their government lied to them. And that was a big factor in the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. Just as the independent media and the blogs will be a big factor in the eventual collapse of this corrupt, tyrannical regime. And it is coming. The only thing that will stop it is if the government can find an excuse to declare martial law, a dictatorship, shred what's left of the Constitution, and shut down unlicensed content on the Internet, which they're trying to figure out a way they can do it. How they can say only government-approved people can post to the Internet without it being an obvious and blatant violation of our First Amendment right to freedom of speech. The Internet is the purest embodiment of democracy. We all have an equal voice out there with which to reach our fellow Americans and say, hey, we've got some problems. And that's a good thing. We're going to take another break for commercials, more about computers when we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. There's a very troubling development up at the Apple Computer Company. First of all, as you probably have already heard, sales for the Apple iWatch have not been good. There was an initial burst of everybody wanted one to prove that they could get one, and then it really kind of fell off. And part of the problem is that this kind of gizmo gadget sold as a fashion accessory. Remember, they even had one that was done in gold, was over $1,000. Ooh, wow, I've got the gold iWatch. Proves I'm a better human being than you are. And that kind of sales pitch only works when you have a healthy economy where everybody's making enough money to pay all their bills, all their necessities, and they got something left over to get caprices, fun things, toys. We don't have that economy right now. And the other aspect of it is that market research is showing that the vast majority of people with the Apple Watch, all they're using it for is to get notifications from their iPhone on their wrist, and you can get watches that will do that for $20 from Samsung. So Apple kind of missed the market on this one. Apple has just announced that they have secured a patent on a new technology that will peek into your bank account in order to determine targeted advertising to you on your smart devices. Now, I have a real problem with that one. It's bad enough with the government looking in at what we're buying, either our bank accounts or the supermarket shopping cards. But I don't want advertising agencies looking at my purchases to decide what I'm going to buy next week. It's getting a little too intrusive. And you know something? In the long run, it's self-defeating. Because they'll look at what you buy, and then they'll offer to sell you more of it. But you've already bought it, right? The focus really ought to be on showing you something you don't have and have not bought before that you might be interested in. And I've already seen this here on the web. I'll go out and I'll buy something, and I'll immediately see ads for more of the exact same thing in the targeted advertising on websites I visit. Well, even eBay does it. I'll buy an electric instrument, and immediately there's 5 ads for different variations of the same instrument. I'm not going to buy those. I've already got one. It's rather ridiculous here. Now, on top of the problems with the F-35, the F-22, the Independence-class littoral combat ship, the Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, the Donald Cook's electronic systems, and so forth and so forth and so forth and so on. There's apparently a problem looming with Boeing's new design of an aircraft tanker, where they said, well, we're just going to not use the old KCs. It's time for a brand new developed aircraft. And apparently they haven't even got this off the ground yet. And they've already found so many problems, they're looking at almost $1 billion in redesign, re-engineer, refit. Now, all these defense companies love it when an old weapon system is let go and they bring a new one on, because the R&D money, huge amounts of profits, and very often the people using those older weapons aren't ready to let them go. There's been a huge stink over the plan to retire the A-10 attack aircraft, because it is one of the real wonders of military aviation, for those of you who are into war and killing. And I'm not into war and killing, but the A-10 is a cool aircraft. But no, we're going to let that go, and we're going to come up with a new ground attack aircraft that's going to be just as good as the F-35. And, of course, as we all know, the F-35 is already inferior to the F-16 from the 1970s. They're trying to push it forward, saying we're going to give the pilots workarounds for all the software issues. And now they're retiring all the existing working tanker aircraft because they want to come up with a new design. This is an ongoing problem. It's a pattern that we see in military procurement. They'll put out a system. It's got problems. They'll fix and fix and fix. And just at the point where they get it running properly, it's time to scrap it and start the process all over again. Just like computer companies with operating systems. Microsoft puts out Windows XP, got lots of problems. People work on it, get it to the point where it's actually a useful system. Oh no, it's time to scrap it. You need to go on to Vista. You need to go on to Windows 8 and now Windows 10. Planned obsolescence. It's all about maximizing profit, not producing a quality product. And America's military procurement does not produce a quality product. They produce profitable products, very expensive products. Other countries like Russia and China, when they design and build a weapon system, the goal is a weapon system that works and is affordable. And it's because of that disparity in the philosophy behind our relative weapons programs that the fact that the United States of America spends so much more money on the weapons of war than other countries does not guarantee us a victory. So Boeing's dealing with that. We're now hearing from the United States government that they want to review the Freedom of Information Act. Because those gosh darn Americans are just asking for too many documents that we don't think they ought to look at. And so they're looking at reviewing the Freedom of Information Act, which basically in government speak means they're going to try and find some way to either fill it with more exceptions, or if not, repeal it outright. Far from being the most transparent administration in history, the Obama administration has turned out to be the most secretive. And now they want to reduce, if not kill, the Freedom of Information Act. That's a warning sign. Just like all these trade agreements being conducted in secrecy. The attitude we're getting from Washington, D.C. is, leave us alone. This is none of your business. We're going to make the deals that work for us, and you will be expected to abide by them, and that's your place in the universe. Now, story coming out of Rise 2 Cents, talking about how new breakthroughs in quantum theory are supporting the idea that the universe doesn't have a beginning or an end, which, if you think about it, the universe is mostly nothing. Empty space. Now, physicists have claimed for decades that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed, only converted from one form to the other. That this idea that everything has a beginning and an end is merely from our perception as a carbon-based life form that goes through the process of birth and death. But in the greater scheme of the cosmos, there is no beginning or end. It just stretches forever. It just is. And this is another reason to go back to the article that I reposted it to whatreallyhappened.com. The Big Bang Theory is just religion dressed up as science. It's full of holes. It's full of problems. But it's supported because the Bible bangers like it. Oh, there was a big bang. God sneezed, and we are all his divine snot. Claire's laughing in the other room. That's what they're saying, basically. You know, that everything in the universe came from this infinitesimal tiny spot. And you wonder why I have doubts about that. All right, we're coming up on our last commercial break of the day. We're going to be coming on back talking about a few more things. Aloha, America, and going back to the topic of new technologies deployed before they're really ready. Here on the island of Oahu, Time Warner Oceanic has been upgrading their broadband internet service, and I was initially very pleased when I was notified that they were going to upgrade our internet connection from the 50 megabits per second that we had been on to 300 megabits per second. And they sent us the modem. I put it all in. We're not getting 300 megabits per second, but we're certainly getting a lot faster than the 50. But it seems to have some issues that I can't track down. And if you are one of the recipients of these new 300 megabit per second modems, you may want to be on the lookout. Now, if you're dealing with an application that is only going out to the Internet intermittently, like email or web browsing, you're probably not going to see anything. But if you're running some kind of a continuous connection, like we do for the Comrex system that allows me to answer the phones, you're going to get dropped connections. Secure shell connections, rlogin telnet, they'll go for so many minutes, then they'll drop. Connections to Microsoft Exchange, as if that was not already problematic enough, will cut off. And this is apparently a new enough problem surfacing where nobody knows what's going on yet. I'm seeing a lot of posts out on the Internet about, yeah, I'm getting this as well. We got the new 300 megabits per second modem. I'm not getting the speed, and all of a sudden things requiring a current ongoing connection quit working at random intervals. Don't they test this stuff before they put it on out there? It's amazing. Okay, over in Liberia, they are confirming a second Ebola death in the resurgent outbreak. So this thing is not quite gone away over there. Story yesterday that was over in Government Slaves, House Republicans fast-track bill to prevent states from labeling GMO food. And it did pass out of the House Agricultural Committee and is headed for the floor for a vote. They're fast-tracking this thing. This bill will ban the United States, cities, counties, everybody, from mandatory GMO labeling or banning GMO crops. It's just another complete giveaway to Monsanto, because Monsanto is a very generous campaign contributor coming up into an election year. And I think what's going on behind all of this GMO is a plan to make the world dependent on American-provided seeds for food production. They're doing with food what Bretton Woods did with the currency. The whole world will have to come to the American empire if they're going to grow food next year. The technology is dangerous. It's producing dangerous products. It is very risky because if the entire world is dependent on GMO seeds and Monsanto makes a mistake, we could be looking at an extinction-level event. Look what happened in India with the BT cotton. Absolutely destroyed the cotton industry for a year. Epidemic of suicides of farmers who lost the work of a lifetime in a single botched growing season. And the House of Representatives, the U.S. Congress, the finest Congress money can buy, is now saying that nobody in the United States of America will be able to require GMO labeling, and nobody will be able to ban GMO crops like they tried to do down in Maui. You will accept your GMO frankenseeds and you will like it. Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil. Article over at RINF.com. Who will bail out humanity if the GMO promoters win? Especially in the possibility of there being some kind of an accident, which is only a matter of time, because these GMO products are being put out there recklessly. As soon as they can get something they can get a patent on, it's in the stores and being forced on farmers all over the world. And there have already been serious mistakes. All of those farmers who got the Roundup Ready corn and soy are in trouble because the glyphosate resistance gene has now migrated to the pest plants. All those farmers who bought the BT crops so they wouldn't have to use pesticides all over their crops, they're now having to go back to pesticides because the insects have evolved to be tolerant of the genetically produced toxins. Monsanto's response is, oh, don't worry, we're coming up with Roundup 2, we're coming up with BT the sequel. The new version of Roundup is going to include one of the ingredients out of Agent Orange. They're on a path to disaster here. All in the name of a fast buck. Now, there's an article over in naturalnews.com. Right now, 90% of all U.S. corn production is GMO. And companies are having to import large amounts of non-GMO corn to keep up with the demand. Well, if this bill gets out of the U.S. Congress, that won't be happening anymore because nobody will be allowed to label their crops GMO or non-GMO. Maybe they can still say this is non-GMO. But at some point, I think they're probably going to say this law needs to protect the GMO industry by banning labels on non-GMO corn. It's unfair trade practices. We're seeing that behind all these laws, behind these trade agreements, that corporate profitability is now of a higher concern with government than the health and safety of our products, our food, and the health of the American people as a whole. Because, hey, if this stuff makes you sick, then it stimulates the economy because you have to go over to the doctor and get a pill. And that's good for the economy as well. Another story coming out of Natural News. Medical board threatens to destroy careers of doctor who question the propaganda of the big pharmaceutical associations. Meanwhile, of course, over in Europe, over in Great Britain, they're dealing with an epidemic of narcolepsy caused by the swine flu jabs. Permanent harm to young girls given the HPV vaccine. And finally, over in one of the scientific journals, there was an article, Theoretical Aspects of Autism Causes a Review, roundabout way saying that vaccines may not actually cause autism, but they will trigger it in a susceptible segment of the population because of genetic differences. The one-size-fit-all does not work. And so the big pharma will say, well, see, it proves our vaccines don't cause autism. Yeah, but they can trigger it. Well, that's your problem. You've got the wrong DNA. You should have bought a Roundup Ready baby from Monsanto rather than breed one for yourself. What were you thinking? You're making a child with sex. That's where we're headed. Absolutely headed. Article coming out of ABC's of Dumbed Down. There is now a move to require homeschoolers to conform to the Common Core educational standards and testing, which completely negates the whole point of homeschooling, which is to give your kid an education and not have him dumbed down. Now the government is saying, you will teach your child the way we think they should be taught. Whatever happened to the rights of a parent to want the best for their kid? Because the best is not Common Core. And finally, there was this article, I gotta say, cracked.com. It's supposed to be humor and satire, but every once in a while they have an article that really gets to the issue. And they had the one called 6 Insane Educational Claims Published in Real Textbooks. And basically, one of the things they're talking about are all the wrong things that are in educational books. It really is nonsense. We got to. Okay, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here. Get something useful done with the rest of the day. Going to be working on the membership system code for whatreallyhappened.com. We're trying out some new advertisers. Please bear with us. We're trying to get a better class of advertisers coming on in. We'll be back Monday. Have a good weekend. Aloha, America.